When it comes to being an Uber driver and a Lyft driver and a rideshare driver in general, most people decide to use their own car. However, there are a few issues you might run into. So in this video, I'm going to talk about the 5 things you should really know before using your own car to be a rideshare driver. Number 1, depreciation. Now this is the one I know, super simple, super straightforward, and if anything, a bit Captain Obvious, but I want to mention it because it's the number 1 thing you really have to keep in mind. The second you, let's say, turn on that app and you start driving, your car is going to get depreciation, meaning the value of your car will go down mile after mile after mile. And the amount of wear and tear you're going to put in your car could be a lot. Now, of course, again, I know this is a bit Captain Obvious, the more that you drive, the more wear and tear goes on your car. I mean, that makes sense. Pretty logical. However, it is kind of unfortunate, and I've mentioned this in a lot of other videos, that Uber and Lyft is one of those jobs, you know, for better or for worse, if anything for worse, right? That the more that you drive, the more that you have to spend in terms of the depreciation sometime later down the line. Your car, the wear and tear on it is going to get worse and worse over time, meaning that how long you're going to have your car or whatever, or other things you want to do in the future, which I'll talk about a little bit later in this video, could be compromised or basically not as favorable when it comes to your vehicle. And just in general, you know, if you think about it, if you're actually doing it part-time here and there, yes, of course, remember, anytime you drive a single mile on your car, you're going to get depreciation on your car, the wear and tear, the value is going to go down, etc., etc. But if you're doing it full-time and everything, that is a lot of wear and tear. And another big thing to keep in mind, and I think this is a big thing a lot of drivers forget, is the kind of hard mile, so to speak. What I mean is, for most people driving, you're not driving in a rural area. I mean, there are some drivers, of course. But when it comes to most drivers, they're in cities. Boston, Miami, Chicago, Los Angeles, San Francisco, of course. You know, all these major cities. Those are the best places to drive, the best places to make the most amount of money. And in case you didn't know, the best times to drive are the morning commutes, 7 to 9 a.m., evening commutes, 5 to 7 p.m., Friday and Saturday nights, say about 9 p.m. to 2 or 3 a.m., right? Best times to drive. And if you think about that, one, you're doing city miles, stop and go a lot, stopping and starting over and over and over again. You're going to be, you know, just constantly putting those hard miles on your car. So it's not as much as you being like, oh, I'm doing a 20-mile drive on the highway, coasting at 60 miles an hour. You're stop and go. And as you can imagine, even though, yeah, that's only, let's say, 5 miles on the highway versus 5 miles in the city, the 5 miles in the city is going to be a lot more aggressive on your car for the depreciation or other things I am going to be talking about. The second thing to keep in mind, during those peak hours, I mean, I know it sounds kind of, again, Captain Obvious, but these are things just to keep in mind. That is you being in traffic. It's a lot of stop and go, as opposed to, if it's not as much of a traffic-y period, that's the best word for that, where you can kind of coast a little bit, you stop at a stoplight, you then go with traffic. As we all know, it could be bumper to bumper, it could be stop and go a lot more aggressively. And keep in mind, this is more and more depreciation you're putting on your car, which is going to be very important down the line. And again, I will talk about that a bit later in this video. But all the depreciation on your car is really unfortunate. And like I said, you know, let's say if you want to go into this full time and you want to drive a lot, the more money you drive, the more times, that you drive, and the more money that you make also unfortunately correlates with the more depreciation on your vehicle. Number 2, the end game. Now, when it comes to most people's vehicles, the typical end game typically is 2 things for most people. One, you're going to resell it, whether you just want to get cash for it and explore other options, whether you want to swap it, like say for another car. Basically, you're looking to resell it for some type of money or something, right? Whatever it is. The second is typically you're going to basically just run it into the ground, and whenever it's kicked or done, you're done with the vehicle, right? Those are mainly 2 options. Of course, the third one, you might give it away. You know, there's different ways, obviously, when it comes to your vehicle. But keep in mind that, one, when it comes to, like, say, running it into the ground, the more that you drive, the quicker that's going to come. So, like, say if you want your car to last a long time, I hate to say it, Uber and Lyft might not be for you. Maybe you're even better off renting a vehicle, which is something I will talk about a bit later in this video, right? So there are different options you have, but the second one that I really want to stress is reselling it. This gets really interesting. At first glance, which is half true, most people think, oh, well, the more miles that are on the car, the less I can resell it for, right? I think everyone kind of knows that. That's part of the depreciation, right? Like I talked about on point number 1. But I think a bigger thing that a lot of people don't realize is that if you, let's say you are looking to sell it to a dealership, you don't want to go on Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace or eBay or one of those sites. You're like, I'm going to go to a dealership, sell my car, and maybe get another one, maybe swap it at a dealership. I've actually done that a lot of times. Like I started with a Honda Civic, I think was my first. No, I started with a Grand Prix, actually. It was my first car. Then a Honda Civic, then a Ford Transit, then a Prius, and then back to the Ford Transit, right? And every single time I've done this, I've actually done it at the dealership where I almost swap a car. I go to sell one in, we negotiate and kind of debate about the price. I get the second vehicle, and then we kind of negotiate, and this back and forth, right? But anyway, now when it comes to dealerships, when you go to, like, say, sell your car in that dealership, the first question they will ask you, one of the first, they'll give you a list of, like, things about the car. Has this car ever been in an accident? Has this car ever X, Y, or Z? There's a bunch of questions they'll ask you. One of the ones they ask you is, has this car ever been used for a taxi or ride-share-like service like Lyft and Uber? So keep in mind, if you are looking to resell your car at some point later down the line, it's not just about the miles, which could be an issue. And other things I'm going to talk about in this video too. You're talking about, let's say, if you put a ton of maintenance on your car and there's a bunch of things you have to rebuild, if it's been in any accidents, like I mentioned when it comes to that list, if there's other issues that you have with the vehicle that have just racked up. It's very unfortunate that when you use your own vehicle when it comes to Lyft and Uber, not only is there depreciation happening right at that moment, every single mile you drive is more and more depreciation, more wear and tear, and remember, they're hard miles, which can equal more maintenance, which I'm going to talk about in a second. But also, at the end game, at the end of all of this, when you're like, all right, I'm either A, going to run it into the ground, which means it's going to happen quicker, right, if you think about it. 2, if, let's say, to talk about you giving it away, well, if you give someone that vehicle, it could be so worn down after, let's say, tons of driving. And trust me, when you're driving for Lyft and Uber, if, let's say, you're doing it full time, you'd be surprised how quickly your car will get that wear and tear. Like, remember, every mile it racks on. But thirdly, if, let's say, you're looking to resell it, the value of it, not just with the miles, but the fact that it was used as a rideshare vehicle, the value is going to drop a lot. Number 3, accident potential. This is a very unfortunate thing, but look, I'm talking about the numbers now. I'm talking about the statistics. The more that you're on the road, the more likely you are to get into an accident. Again, I know it's not the best thing to hear on a video like this. You're probably watching this because you're like, oh, I'm considering driving for Lyft and Uber. I have my vehicle. I have my driver's license. That's pretty much all you need when it comes to driving for Lyft and Uber, right? Those are the benefits of Lyft and Uber, right? We all know the flexible schedule, the instant cash outs, but I've mentioned this in a lot of other videos. The barrier to entry is pretty low, right? All you need really is a vehicle and a driver's license. Even if you don't have a vehicle, you can rent one. Now, when it comes to accidents, first thing I want to say, 1, make sure you have vehicle insurance, make sure you have auto insurance. If you don't, just stop watching this video and get insurance. Just have it. Just in general, make sure you have auto insurance. The second thing is I do suggest on top of this to also have rideshare insurance. This is a especially kind of like thing when it comes to insurance that's usually in addition to your auto insurance. Although there are a lot of companies that say, hey, if you already have insurance with us, we can tack on a rideshare policy or whatever. Make sure you do this because the last thing you want to do is be in an accident. You call them and you're like, hey, I was in this accident, but they were under me. It wasn't my fault, but I was driving Lyft and Uber. I had a passenger in my car. And they're like, well, wait, you were driving Lyft and Uber? You never told us that. We're not going to cover you. And not surprisingly, insurance companies will use any excuse they can to not cover you, right? So just have insurance, of course. Even if you're not driving for Lyft and Uber, have insurance. But also I suggest rideshare insurance. And when it comes to accidents, though, of course, hopefully it never happens. Of course, right? But remember, to be realistic, the more that you're on the road, the more likely you are to be into an accident. And unfortunately, I've heard a lot of horror stories that Lyft and Uber wasn't the best when it comes to covering you. I've heard of stories of insurance companies not covering you that well. When it comes to even things like rideshare insurance, which should cover you up to a certain point. But remember, you never know. Every situation is vastly different. This is something to keep in mind. And I say this because if you, like, say you're driving your own vehicle and you're doing this part-time, but you're really racking up those miles, like say you're doing a 9 to 5 job, Monday through Friday, and then on Saturday and Sunday you're doing 5 or 10 hours a day, or you're doing basically a lot of driving. If you get into an accident, that could compromise other things in your life. If, let's say, you need that car to go to work Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, and I know I'm being very pessimistic here, I want to say, there are a lot of benefits to driving. I love driving for Lyft and Uber. I don't drive for them anymore, but I love doing it when I was really focusing on music and YouTube and all this kind of stuff. So I know it's sounding very pessimistic, but I'd rather be very transparent and let everybody know rather than something happening and someone didn't expect it, right? I like to be very honest in all my videos. And when you think about it, again, I know it sounds pessimistic. The more that you're on the road, the more likely you are to get into an accident. And if that does happen, one, the value of that car probably will go down. If you think of things like Carfax or whatever, it will be on kind of the car's just sheet in terms of that Carfax of the history of that car. It's saying, yeah, this car was in an accident. Here's what had to be replaced. Here's what happened. If, let's say, you get into an accident and things seem okay, but later on down the line, things get damaged. And like say it didn't go through insurance, now you have to cover it out of your own pocket. And another thing, like I said, if like say you have to get to and from work and you're using your own car to drive and something happens to that vehicle, even if insurance covers all of it, keep in mind, one, if like say you're driving part-time, you cannot use that car to get to your own work. I know it sounds kind of simple to say. That's part of the reality. But two, if you are driving full-time for Lyft and Uber and you're relying on that vehicle to put food on the table for ends meet and everything, and you get into an accident, of course, you're not able to drive. And that's a bunch of time now that you're like, shoot, I can't even work. Yeah, insurance is covering it, or the rideshare insurance is covering it, thank God. But now I can't even work. So keep that in mind when it comes to your vehicle, that any accident is going to go on that record. And that vehicle, I know it sounds, again, Captain Obvious, but something to keep in mind, that vehicle is not able to be used given the intensity of the accident. Number 4, maintenance. Now, I want to talk about this one a bit different than depreciation, right? When it comes to depreciation, you're driving your vehicle, the more miles you put on it, the value of that vehicle goes down. Makes sense. When it comes to maintenance, though, again, this is pretty straightforward, but something to keep in mind, you may have a huge, rude awakening when it comes to maintenance. My brother was driving for Lyft. He was like, oh, this is great. I'm making good money. I think he was making about, I believe it was like $40-ish an hour in Denver. He was doing all the peak hours, like I talked about before. He was hitting all the bonuses. And keep in mind, Lexi, you do want to make a lot of money in driving. Make sure you hit those bonuses, get all those rewards and incentives that they're going to give you. However, because he was driving so much, his brakes got worn down insanely fast, and he had to replace all of them. That's just one example of maintenance. Your tires, your brakes. I could go car part by car part in a sense, I guess. But you get what I'm saying when it comes to the maintenance on your vehicle is going to be a lot more intensive. Things like oil changes are going to be a lot more common. Of course, you do have your typical expenses, things like, like gas or whatever. That's kind of standard, I feel like, no matter what. But keep in mind, not just with the depreciation in terms of the actual value of your vehicle, that's going to be an issue, especially, like I said, if you're looking to resell it or whatever. But the maintenance on your car, which again is just part of owning a vehicle, is going to be a lot more frequent when it comes to Lyft and Uber. And I've already done a bunch of videos about how Lyft and Uber drivers don't make as much money now as they used to, how things are a lot more tricky. In addition, Uber and Lyft's now taking a bigger cut. When I first started driving, Uber and Lyft took a 20% cut out of all the earnings. Now, it kind of depends on the area, which is, again, is very bizarre. I don't get it. But now, you're looking at some people telling me they're like, yeah, Uber and Lyft takes 50 or 60% of my earnings, and it's almost flip-flopped. Where before it was like a 20-80 split. If I made $100, I'd get 80. Uber and Lyft would get 20. I feel like that's fair. Right now, it's almost the reversal, right? It's getting a bit ridiculous. And with Uber and Lyft drivers making less money than before, and maintenance now being more expensive than before, there's a huge gap that's not the best when it comes to drivers, right? It's not just enough now of you being like, oh man, like I used that example, you have to replace your brakes, or you have to get another oil change because you're driving so much, or your tires are so worn down, you have to get new ones, or whatever. All these different maintenance things that just comes with owning a vehicle. Now those maintenance things are just way more expensive with inflation and everything happening. And this gap getting bigger and bigger with you having to spend more money just to maintain your car or do more maintenance on your car because you're driving so much and you're not making that much money. Again, these are all things to keep in mind. Number 5, cleaning. I wanted to talk about this one because this one seems kind of random, being like cleaning. Like all the other ones were very technical, like depreciation and reselling and maintenance and all this kind of stuff. This one seems kind of random, but I did want to mention it that this is one of those ones, okay, just trust me on this, that at first seems kind of like, oh, who cares? Like, yeah, you want your car to be clean. You want it to smell good. You want to make sure it's visually appealing, not only on the inside, which I feel like most drivers are pretty good at, although you never know, but also on the outside. In Boston, I never really had to worry about the visualness of my car on the outside. It rains a lot in Boston. Same thing with like places like Seattle. Here in LA, though, you definitely need those car washes. I mean, I'd say for most drivers, you probably should wash your car maybe once every week or 2 weeks, honestly. So that can add up too. I'm going to say that's a side note. That's another expense you have to keep in mind, getting your car detailed and everything. But this is one, again, that trust me, that at first glance seems like, oh, who cares? But over time, start to be very kind of annoying. And yes, this is just part of driving a Lyft and Uber. This is one of those things. But it really started to add up of more of the time of that every single day. There would always be, I don't know why, people would constantly leave wrappers in my car. There was one time, this lady had kids with her, and the kid, I don't know why, dumped out all the cereal on my seat. She gave me a huge tip because she's like, oh my God, like why? There's a bunch of like Reese's Puffs all over my back seat. You know, there were a bunch of times where people left like, say, I know, they were doing it in Boston, the small bottles of alcohol, we refer to them as nips, in case you're curious. I know there's different names for them, like minis, miniatures, airplane bottles, ponies, 50s, shooters. These are different names I've heard. But anyway, I went and I found a couple nips in my back. I'm like, what the? Like, not only are they drinking in the car, which I didn't know, I was very observant, but like, and these are all these different issues that every single day you have to then go into your car, clean it out. If someone spills something, yes, you can charge them for it, especially like say if someone pukes in your car. I know that's a big worry for a lot of people. But this is something that over time really kind of starts, I don't know how to describe it. It's one of those things that in the beginning, it's kind of like the small things start to add up a lot more over time, right? So every day, you really should go to your own car, look through everything, make sure it's clean, make sure it smells good, make sure, again, the visualness of the inside and especially the outside. Keep in mind, when you pull up, the first impression someone has of you when it comes to, like, say, them giving you a nice tip, of course, giving you a good rating, is how your car looks on the outside. If they walk up and it's super dirty and dusty or there's stuff all over it or whatever, that's their first impression. As we all know, it's kind of like Psychology 101. First impressions go a long way. So this is something to keep in mind that when you have your own vehicle, you're going to have to clean it a lot more. You're going to have to be way more cognizant about how it smells on the inside. And we've all been there where you get in some cars, you're like, how does the driver not smell that? Something smells a bit funky or a bit off, right? These are things you have to worry about every single time you drive. And again, it seems small, like, oh, just one wrapper here, you throw it away. But then when this happens day after day after day, it really starts to eat at you. We're like, oh my God, another mess in my backseat or another bunch of stuff in the backseat I have to clean up and then do it all again tomorrow. And now a bonus point, and that is items. This is a small one. I'm going to go over this pretty quick, but keep in mind when it comes to driving for Lyft and Uber, you do want to have certain items in your car. I have done an entire video about the items you definitely should have as a driver. I have it listed below in the description, but overall, you only need a few things, really. I'm going to say this is kind of like old school Lyft and Uber. You don't need the candy or the snacks. I know a lot of drivers do this sometimes, even still to this day. Back in the day, you almost needed like a bowl of candy, almost like Halloween or something. Now you don't need that. I know some drivers are like, oh, we have gum, we have mint, we have those small bottles of water, we have candy as well. You don't really need that in your car, so I say that. But there are some things you do need. One, definitely get a phone mount. You should have it anyway. I feel like everyone uses their phone GPS, which, by the way, I'm a huge fan of Google Maps. Hate Waze, hate Apple Maps, Google Maps all the way. But everyone uses their phone GPS. So it makes sense, of course, and you have a phone mount anyway. Things like an aux cord, I do suggest. I know you can do Bluetooth, but I feel like Bluetooth can be super glitchy sometimes. Besides that, I'd also suggest having napkins in your car and Febreze. Those are two that I definitely suggest because, especially the napkins, you never know what's going to spill or what's going to happen. Trust me, the napkins or paper towels have saved me tons of times. And then also the Febreze is nice because let's say someone gets in your car and they have McDonald's with them and your car smells aggressively like McDonald's fries and everything. It's just nice to have to kind of spray your car, maybe roll the windows down, just kind of like reset the smell, like we talked about earlier when it comes to cleaning the car. That could definitely help. And then one last thing I will say is if you can have it, a dual phone charger. Of course, make sure you get a phone charger for your phone. Your phone is going to die within reason quicker than you think. I mean, it even makes sense. If you're running, let's say, the Uber or Lyft app or both, and Google Maps, and let's say Pandora, for example, your phone is just naturally going to die quicker. If let's say you're answering calls more because people are calling you when it comes to the ride, again, these things to keep in mind, have a phone charger for you, but I also suggest getting like a splitter or one of those car hookups that have like multiple USB ports. Get a phone charger that has like the iPhone hookup and an Android hookup or whatever. There's even some cables you can get that kind of split out into both iPhone, Android, and a couple like other different ports, right? Just get this stuff. So these are things you're going to have in your vehicle. Again, this is a very small one compared to like the maintenance or accidents or depreciation. But again, just something to keep in mind. And now a second bonus point, and that is renting. I did touch upon renting a couple times throughout this video. I do want to briefly touch upon this, that remember, in case you didn't know, you can rent a car to drive for Lyft and Uber. And I think, and there's probably like a human psychological fallacy or whatever the right word is or whatever, that I think a lot of people think like, well, I have my own vehicle. I'm not going to rent. I have my own vehicle. I have friends who actually have their own vehicle and still decide to rent one through Lyft and Uber because they feel it's a better value for them. Now, of course, I've done tons of videos. I've gone really in depth about renting, so I'm going to skim the surface here. But when it comes to renting, you're looking about spending, I'd say between $200. Actually, I might up that now because things have gotten more expensive. Inflation. I'd say about $250 to $350 a week. That's a lot of money, right? And remember, again, I know it's math 101, but I do want to mention it and be transparent. You're always starting in the hole. So let's say if you want to drive for Lyft and Uber and not use your own vehicle, right? Again, there's pros and cons to both. But let's say you want to do this part-time. I'm going to say using your own vehicle is a lot better. If you want to do it full-time, renting could work out a little bit better in your favor. But remember, it does depend. Each person's situation is vastly different, right? Even full-time, if you're doing 40 hours a week, you should probably still use your own vehicle, but still you never know, right? You might be able to get a good deal or whatever. When it comes to renting a vehicle through Lyft and Uber, there are a lot of different terms, right? Some of them I've seen are like, hey, you pay $210 a week. It's unlimited miles. There's also maintenance guaranteed on the vehicle up to a certain point. You do have to spend your own money in gas, but you also get gas discounts, right? So there's certain incentives. You're like, all right, if you're racking in, I'm talking like 60 or something hours a week, and you're really going hard when it comes to driving, it might make actually some sense to look into the numbers of renting a vehicle. Now, of course, like I said, every situation is a bit different, but I think the biggest thing when it comes to renting a vehicle is really the fact that you're starting in the hole. If you're spending, let's say, $250 a week to rent a car through Lyft and Uber, you have to drive $250 just to break even. Anything past that, of course, is profit, but you just have to drive enough to do that. Now, like I said, to some people, it's worth it. I remember one of my friends was telling me that she's like, yeah, I rent a car through Uber. I pay $200 a week. I'd much rather, because she drives so much, she's like, I'd much rather spend $200 a week, and then anything past that is profit. I can drive that car into the ground, hopefully not literally, but figuratively, right? And none of that goes on my actual vehicle, because at some point, I do want to resell my vehicle a little bit in the future, and those miles are not going on my car. So these are things that are just super, super important to keep in mind when it comes to renting a vehicle. Again, there's pros and cons. I think the biggest pro, honestly, when it comes to renting is if you don't have your own vehicle, of course. I know it sounds Captain Obvious, but if you don't have your own vehicle, but you do want to drive, you want to get out there, start making money, all the benefits you know about Lyft and Uber, yes, renting is a great way to go. But I think for the purpose of this video, you're probably watching it because you have your own vehicle. Should you rent one? Or should you, let's say, just use your own? I suggest at least look into it. Never a bad idea. Calculate out and look into the exact specifics, because remember, every person's situation is a bit different. Look into the specifics of how much you're planning on driving, how much money you can make, and of course, how much that rental vehicle costs, and the terms of the rental vehicle. Again, always important to know, because in some cases, you should just drive with your own car, even given everything considered that I mentioned in this video. But in other cases, maybe getting a rental is actually a better option.